Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the UW-Stout School of Art and Design Speaker Series, Spring 2021. This is our very first event, so we're glad that you can join us tonight. It looks like there might be still more people joining in. If you know of anyone who might be interested in participating, tuning in to hear our first guest, please, by all means, share the link far and wide. You can tune in anywhere. My name is Jerry Hoy. I am a associate professor of music here at Stout and a choir director. And it is my pleasure to welcome Brandon Acker joining us today from Chicago. And he's going to tell us a lot more about what he does, specifically with instruments that are related to the guitar and the lute. Before we begin, I'd like to make sure to give thanks to UW-Stout and the students who are funding this particular event. And without further ado, Brandon.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brandon Acker, and really happy to be here to share really my love for all things that go pluck. Starting with the guitar and going backward in time, I've sort of been exploring over the last decade or so classical guitars, but also lutes and theorbos and all things related. And it's sort of a magical world of instruments and music. And I hope to just sort of show you why I'm so enthusiastic about this music and these instruments today. But we thought it'd be fun to start by sort of explaining that maybe the elephant in the room, which is how does one end up playing the lute? You know, do you start from being young and saying, oh, I wish I was a lute. I wish I would be a lute player one day. And in my case, definitely not. I really liked rock music, and I think we have some pictures. I was in a metal band. I had some rockin' hair. I kind of wish I had it still. Yeah, I really loved playing rock music, rock and metal, and having mosh pits at the shows. There's this intensity to the music that I really I loved, and I still listen to metal. I still love metal. Nothing wrong with metal. So I thought I was going to do this forever, but then I discovered the classical guitar, and I ended up going to college for being a recording engineer, but also I needed an instrument, so I kind of had to pick the classical guitar. Next thing you know, I'm doing 2 degrees in classical guitar, in which I discover, as I go deeper into the history of the instruments, I discover the world of transcriptions. This is a classical guitar back here. Of course, it looks like a normal guitar. I think everybody is familiar with that shape, the hourglass shape guitar. But I kept going deeper until I ended up in Wisconsin, where I'm from, at the Madison Early Music Festival, where I actually got to hold a lute and hear professional early music players play these instruments, theorbos, lutes, Baroque guitars. I had no idea what these were, and I just kind of fell in love with the sound. So I thought I would give you a bit of a tour of some of what I've learned since. If we trace the origins of guitar-like instruments back as they arrive in Europe, there's a key moment I'd like to emphasize, and that is when the Moors, or the Muslim inhabitants of North Africa around the 8th century, I believe, when they invade the Iberian Peninsula, they bring with them their culture, their music, their language, and that infuses with the culture of the time in modern day Spain. And basically what happened was they brought along with them this instrument called the oud. Al-oud is Arabic for wood, right? And they're from wood, maybe you could say. And it's a bowl back instrument, this beautiful round back instrument with this interesting foreign looking bent backward peg box with wooden pegs that turn like violin pegs. There are no frets, so that means when you pluck the instrument, you have all the notes in between which is a really great part of the sound. This characteristic sound of a lot of Central Asian and you could say Middle Eastern music. And there's this gorgeous sound hole design called a rose. There's 3 of them. And double strings. So for every 1 string, I'm actually hitting 2 together, which also gives it part of its characteristic sound. I'm not much of an oud player, but just so you can see what the sound is like. So this slippery, slidey ability of the frets to have all this in-between ornaments is a really beautiful effect. Again, I have some practicing to do to be a proper oud player. There's you should listen to some amazing oud players like Anwar Brahim in Tunisia, one of the people who made me fall in love with the lute. The image you're seeing right now is what happened when the Europeans at the time took the oud and they made it their own. They turned it into the lute. And right there what we see is this wonderful painting where we have basically an oud played with a pick. By the way, I didn't mention that. They call it a risha, meaning feather. Often they would have played at the time with maybe even just an eagle's quill or some type of bird quill. And the Europeans adopted the same approach. Same shape instrument, no frets, with a pick. And so that was the one way of playing the instrument for some time. But at a certain point, the music in Europe was developing. And they were developing a new system of polyphonic music. Polyphonos is the origin of the word polyphony. Poly, many, phonos, sounds. So many sounds, polyphony. This idea of having not just one melody, but several melodies happening at the same time. And to do that, to play with a pick is sort of limiting. You can only really play either chords where you hit all the strings, or you can play 1 string. But to play many voices, they wanted to drop the pick and just use their fingers to pluck. And for this, they also needed to add frets. So what we have, when we get to Europe, what they do is they basically take the oud and they turn it into the lute. This is you could say the European take on the oud. They still have a bowl back with the bent backward peg box. You can see all my mess of strings here. Wooden pegs, which we turn like violin pegs. But the new addition is that we don't use a pick. We just use our fingers to pluck. And we have these tied on frets here. Now, in terms of materials, this is kind of an interesting part. For strings, they used sheep intestine, so we call it gut. And so these are sheep intestine strings, and the frets are also made of sheep intestine. I tie these on myself, the frets, just like I tie on the strings. And the cool part of the frets is that allows you to fix the pitches, and which makes it easier to play polyphony. So rather than only playing 1 sound, I can play multiple sounds. Right, my thumb can play 1 part, and my fingers can play a separate line, which is polyphony, right? And so in the Renaissance, which you could say very roughly would be something like 1400 to 1600, though it might have started earlier and even gone a little bit later than that. It's hard to say. This idea of polyphonic music on the solo lute became very, very popular. Just to get us started, let me play you a short piece called Mr. Dowling's Midnight, so you can get a sense of what it sounded like. And there's some beautiful paintings you can see of the time. Mr. Dowling's Midnight is written by John Dowling, who is sort of famous for his melancholic writing. It might be one of the most famous lute players of all time, actually, who had fame in his own lifetime, and was just a wonderful lute virtuoso and prolific composer. So Mr. Dowling's Midnight is this beautiful short piece, which I think you'll hear this concept of polyphony take place here. So we can hear the sound world of the lute is this magic, intimate, charming, silvery timbre, this world which sort of pulls you in rather than sort of plays at you. It's not a very extroverted instrument. I think if you're looking to do flashy things, this is not it. This is not the instrument, right? This is a beautiful instrument that, by its very nature, makes you go, what? And then sort of pulls you into its own little microcosmos. And I love that. I have other instruments which are more extroverted, but there's something about that magical world that pulls you into it that I really, really love about the lute. So one of the most famous pieces for the lute, you could say, is another piece by John Dowling. And I think we actually now can get a glimpse at what the notation for this instrument looks like. Surprisingly to many, the notation for the lute is tablature, which if you play at all some guitar today, you'll see actually bears a bit of a resemblance. What we see, I don't know if we can zoom in on that image at all, but what we see is 6 lines, horizontal lines, and each one of those represents one of the lute's strings. And then we see letters, and then the letters basically correspond to frets. So if I see the top line, a letter on the top line, that means to play the highest string of the instrument. And then if I see an A, that means play it open. If I see a B, that's the first fret. C is the second fret. D, E, F. So they're coordinates. They're a visual mapping system which tells you where to put your finger, as opposed to modern music notation, which says play an E for this long. We don't have that here. We have put your finger there. And it's actually a great system. And people today have actually come back to it. So when I learned electric guitar, the system of notation I learned was tablature, or we call it tab. Same thing. It's string lines for the strings and then numbers. But it's the same concept. So the one we just looked at there was actually the facsimile, the picture of the manuscript from the early 17th century by Dowling for probably his most famous piece, one of the most famous pieces of the Renaissance, you could say, actually, Flow My Tears, or the Lacrimae Pavane, as he calls it, in his solo lute version. And the text so he said it in 2 versions. I should explain. He first publishes this piece as a lute solo, and then he later publishes the same piece, which he did often, more than once, but with for lute and voice with text. And the text is just so sad. I mentioned earlier he was famous for his melancholic writing. The text is, "Flow my tears, fall from your springs, exiled forever let me mourn. Where night's black birds ye sweet infamy sings, there let me live forlorn." So it's just this, like, let me just leave me alone and let me weep. I deserve the worst of the worst, and it's just this really kind of cathartic text. And so in Lacrimae, the solo lute version, we hear all of the parts, and again, that polyphonic writing style. And I thought I'd just demonstrate a little bit of the first part of the song, and then show you this really interesting style of improvisation. Oh, perfect. There we go. Starting the top left. This is, you can follow along here. So that took us to the end of the second line, you see. And from here, we have now the exact same music again. So you can call this a variation, right? Think about, I said this in a class recently, a hilarious example, but it's perfect. Think about the the national anthem that's sung at, a baseball game. Typically, what happens if you have someone like Christina Aguilera come up and sing the national anthem, they won't just sing the notes. They'll sing a lot of notes around the skeleton of the melody, right? Instead of just, 3 notes, they could dance around it with sort of scales. That's ornamentation. That's elaborating upon the existing structure of the melody, and that's a very old idea. And in the Renaissance, this is exactly what we get. So the second part of the Lacrimae is the same tune, but what you could say, sort of Christina Aguilera's type riffs around the melody, but in the lute style, going back 500 years. So this is what Dowling does now around the melody. And forgive me, I have a page turn right in the middle, unfortunately. But this is the same tune with a little bit of elaboration. So there's this gorgeous improvisatory style ornamentation upon the melody. And I should mention that word improvisation is very important here. In the Renaissance, much like jazz music today, it was assumed that if you were a musician worth your weight, you could improvise. So if I gave you 4 chords and told you to now improvise for 10 minutes over them, you should be able to do it. And a lot of this music is like that. It's simple in structure, but then when you add your own improvisations, which should change from performance to performance, that's where the music really begins. And so this is, you could say that this variation that I just played is sort of like written down improvisation. However, what's really fascinating about this specific piece being so famous, we have something like 20 versions, which is really surprising considering that's all from about 500 years ago, 400 years ago. 20 versions of this piece. And each one has a different set of improvisation, ornamentation around the melody, which just goes to show you if we have that many, that means what people actually were playing was different basically every time. We could speculate to say that. And one of the challenges, one of the tasks that I have as a modern player of the lute and trying to understand this style is trying to get into their minds of what's good performance practice, what's the good style of playing the lute. And that means not just to play what Dowling wrote, but to come up with my own sense of how the music goes and then improvise upon it. And that's when things really start getting fun and interesting, is when you actually start improvising in a concert. So that's a bit of a glimpse now into the world of the lute, its notation, its music. You can see that, as if you're familiar at all with guitar, this isn't that different, right? I have chords, I could strum. I have frets, I put my fingers down here to stop notes. I pluck notes here with my fingers. It's really guitar-like. Besides the bowl back, which is very beautiful, and the double swinging that I mentioned earlier. Besides having more than one of every note, those are things you have to get used to, but it's kind of guitar-like in that sense. I like now to move to the Baroque version of an actual guitar. So this is a lute in the lute family that came from the oud. So far we made it from the 8th century, from the Moors going into the Iberian Peninsula, and then basically the beginning, all the way up to the beginning of the Renaissance and into the 16th century. Now, moving forward, I want to introduce you to what arose as one of the first types of guitars. The Baroque guitar is such a cool instrument. Let me just put this down and not break anything. There's a cool painting of a Baroque guitar. Hopefully that's not historical in terms of posture. I couldn't imagine
That
doing
looks
that very long.
painful.
It looks painful, doesn't it? There's another painting if you can pull that up, I think, which maybe might be more pleasant. There we go. I really love the one on the left in particular. I think that's at the it's either at the Met or the Art Institute of Chicago. I think it's at the Met. Really beautiful painting by Caravaggio, I think. Guitars are hourglass shaped, and lutes are teardrop shaped. And the technique is kind of similar. And you'll notice that on my Baroque guitar, compared to a normal guitar, which looks very much like the paintings, of course, because this is all my instruments are replicas of originals. I don't have any original instruments from 400 years ago, unfortunately. They do survive, but they're in museums and they're fragile. So people today, professional players, play replicas of those instruments. It's very guitar-like, right? Hourglass shape, not the teardrop shape. We still have gut frets, gut strings, but now the back is flat, like a modern day guitar. We have the hourglass shape, like a modern day guitar. And now we have 5 pairs of strings, which is closer. The modern guitar is 6 strings, 6 single strings. And here we have 5, so we're quite close, and we even have almost the tuning. It's almost the same as a modern guitar. A, D, G, E, E. If we just had a low E, we would have exactly the same tuning as that, but with double strings. So we're almost there. From 1600 to 1750, this is what you would call a guitar in the Baroque period. So we call it a Baroque guitar. One of my favorite things about my Baroque guitar is this gorgeous sound hole, which, as you saw in the lutes and oud, were decorated, but this one is 3-dimensional. It goes inward, and it's made of goat skin, in fact, which is totally beautiful. This is a design based off of the dome of a mosque in Cordoba, Spain. And I had this guitar made for me in Spain by a luthier in Malaga, and so it's very sentimental because I got to go there and live with him for a few days and experience Malaga and watch him finish making it. So it's very special to me. It's heavily ornamented. This sound hole decoration we call the rose is not for the sound at all. It's just aesthetic. It's just beautiful. Same with the little inlays around it. Same with these beautiful floral bridge decorations, which are actually made out of wood, by the way. That's wood carving on top of the soundboard, and it's called a mustache bridge, actually, which I love. This thing. Again, nothing to do with the sound. It's purely to make it beautiful. And in fact, if you look at Baroque architecture, Baroque costume design, Baroque music, if you listen to it, you'll find out that it's highly ornamented. That was the aesthetic of the time. If you had a bit of collars exposed, why not make it incredibly intricate? You know, the more you zoom in on it, the more detail you see, and that's sort of what you get with the instruments, the music, the architecture, everything. So this is a Baroque guitar, and the Baroque guitar has to be one of my favorite plucked instruments. It plays in 2 main styles. We call it raschiato, which is a strumming, which means strumming with the back of the nails, and then puntillato, which means plucking, which is just like the lute. And you can mix the 2. You can do a bit of strumming, do a bit of plucking, kind of like the modern guitar. This instrument was called by the Italians the chitarra spagnola, which just means the Spanish guitar, right? So it's kind of associated with Spain, although like the lute, it took off all over Europe. You can get really fantastic music all the way from France, Spain, England, and even by some Flemish composers. Let me show you a really cool piece for the Baroque guitar here, if I can manage. If we can pull up the image of the chaconne, this is a facsimile, a picture of the manuscript again. This one is from the Flemish composer François Lecoq, who wrote this gorgeous piece. You can see it's the similar type of notation, but this time 5 lines, and that's because the Baroque guitar has 5 pairs of strings. Now, what we see here are strumming directions as well as plucking directions. And a chaconne, I should mention, is basically a repeating chord progression. If you think about the 12-bar blues today, you can have any two musicians play together and they could both jam, endlessly. And there's like countless hours of blues music, which is just that, and then but variations upon it, right? This is kind of like the Baroque 12-bar blues. The chaconne is this kind of modern sounding chord progression. If you heard that on the radio, I don't think you'd go, what is this weird foreign music? It sounds like something you could hear today. The whole piece is based around that chord progression, again with variations, improvisatory-like variations. So let me play you a little bit of this so we can get a sense now of what the Baroque guitar aesthetic sounds like. So that's just such a charming piece that really captures sort of what you could say is the French Baroque style of music, which is so light and dancey. There was a huge emphasis on dance in the Baroque period, much thanks to to Louis XIV, Louis XIV, who loved dance and was an amazing professional dancer, actually. And so, of course, if the king likes dancing, then you'll get a lot of dancing in the court and it'll become popular. And also he was a fan of the guitar, in fact, and took guitar lessons on this type of Baroque guitar, which I think is so cool, that the king had his private guitar lessons, you know. So that's an example, not only, again, of playing the notation, this tablature system, Much of what I just played, about 30–40% of what I just played, wasn't written down. And I didn't know what I was going to do before I started. So that's sort of the improvisation that I was talking about before. Remember that I said the piece is based off of this. And then what you can do around that is sort of endless. And I sort of found myself, I kind of went to direction spontaneously, and I said I had to make sense of it. This idea here, he writes this out. It's exactly what actually, not even that. That's already an improvisation. I forgot. He writes this. Quite simple. And so I took that as a basis, and I found many, many ways of playing it. Or and all of those are just simple variations upon the chord progression. And what's so cool about Baroque music and Renaissance music, I love this idea that you don't know what you're going to do before you start. You have a skeleton. It's not like you're creating music from scratch. It's more like you're playing with the puzzle pieces, right? And what guides you is basically your spontaneous intuition at any given moment. So that's just such a special thing. When you hear this piece, if you looked up this Chaconne by Lecoq and listened to 5 performances, you would hear 5 different pieces of different lengths with different variations. And that's because the composers, the performers are meant to take part in the act of composition itself, and not just play what's written, which you could say, like Stravinsky was very serious about that, which is the musicians shouldn't add their own concepts, own ideas. They should basically play what's written, right? And they wrote very specifically, now get louder, now play sweetly, now abrupt and short, now by the bridge. They gave you a lot of directions, whereas here, there's not a single direction for how loud to play, what the tempo is, where to pluck, which changes the sound, where the accents are. Nothing. All we have is the bare bones, and we're meant to bring a lot to the table in this music. So you could say that the notation is not the music. The notation is a shorthand for you to create your own piece, in a way. So that's a nice example of what the Baroque guitar can do. I have another example I wanted to show you. There's a facsimile we have as well of a piece called Philia. And a Philia d'Espagne, it was this type of basically Baroque 12-bar blues again, but they're called grounds, and there's lots of them. The Follia was one that really it's called the Follies of Spain. It's a Spanish progression, but apparently a very, very old one, maybe even predating the 15th century, I think. And that's actually this is something else. This is the Caparola manuscript, which has beautiful decorations on it. That's great to look at. But you might have, there's a Folia, which is another manuscript, or maybe not. Well, anyway, if we don't find it, that's okay. Basically, you know what the notation looks like now, so I can just explain it. Basically, the Folia is another version of the Chaconne. It's another dance, which has a series of chords, and this one goes like this. So that's the basic Folia. You could play that on a modern guitar perfectly, and it would sound great. And the Folia was set by so many different composers. They love this progression. And I like to show you now a little bit of what the Baroque guitar can do in terms of strumming. You saw a little bit of that just now in the Lecoq piece. Basically, one of the strumming patterns I'm doing, which is so cool about the Baroque guitar, is this thing called a repico. And the repico is this concept where I take my fingers like this, and I rotate my arm back and forth, kind of like I'm opening a door handle, and I just let the fingers drag through the strings. Kind of an effortless thing, which means I can turn faster get this beautiful, fast-sounding effect. Which is sort of like almost like a proto-flamenco type of a sound, you know, that this complex right hand strum patterns you see in flamenco music today, if you go to Spain, really you can see a bit of that going on in Baroque guitar playing. These really beautiful, intricate strum patterns. And I'll just play just a little bit so we can, because we have one more instrument I want to show you today. This is Sans, a very famous Spanish composer of Baroque guitar music. This is his take on the Follias. So you can hear some punteado, plucking variations, and then you'll hear some improvisatory, I don't know what I'll do yet, some improvisations on the strum here. Improvisation. Another variation by Sans. More strumming. And so that's sort of just an example of how you can take a basic progression and then bring it to life with this whole, you know, ebb and flow of strong and weak variations, all of which, again, can be improvised to no end. And that's just such a cool thing. This really is, you know, it's like classical meets jazz. And I love that. So I could really go on about the Baroque guitar. There's so much here that I would love to tell you about. In the interest of time, I'd like to show you one more instrument, and then we'll see how we are on time here. You got to save the biggest for last, of course. This instrument sitting on the ground here looks like a lute, like the first instrument I showed you, except what they did was around 1600 in Florence, Italy, they were basically inventing a new style of music that would lead to the invention of opera. And they were kind of rediscovering ancient Greek music and history, and they thought there was something special about what they were doing at the time, something magical about it. So their understanding was that it was heavily reliant on speech, and was accompanied by a light plucking instrument that would accompany the voice, but sit underneath the voice. And lutes are amazing at doing that. Famously, Orfeo would accompany himself with the golden lyre, and it was so apparently, you know, that the mythology is about he was such a good singer, and his music was so powerful that he could tame the beasts of hell in the underworld itself. And so for this new style of music they were inventing, which was reliant on text and was supported by something harp-like, they took a lute and they kept adding strings because they thought they wanted the powerful low, deep bass range. So again, it's kind of, I didn't intend for this to happen, but we kind of see the perfect lute right there. And then what they did, they took this lute, which is really from here to there, and they kept adding strings and more strings until you get this very long neck extension. And now what we have is sort of a 6-foot lute That's about as tall as I am, called a theorbo, or a tiorba in Italian. And what it is it's just a lute, but with lots of extra strings, which go all the way up here to a second peg box. So we have one peg box here that we tune like a guitar, and then the strings go all the way up, again, gut strings, to the second peg box, where I have to stand up to tune those if I'm out of tune. And so that's the theorbo. Still, we have a round back on all that. There's a great painting of some noblewoman with this actually a smallish theorbo. That's a smaller one, but you can see the beautiful decoration on the fretboard, the extra sound hole towards the bottom left of the instrument. Pure decoration. Such a cool thing. So the theorbo really took off. It was invented again in Italy around 1580 to 1600, and then really took off and became a very popular instrument for accompanying. It'll be hard for me to get the whole instrument in frame, so I'll maybe leave it like this. The theorbo has 14 strings, and we can think of it as two instruments in one, really. Let's see if I can get closer in frame here. Okay. Again, two instruments in one. We have really kind of the guitar half, which again, you can just play lute-like chords. Baroque guitar like strumming if you want, but it's basically the same. The new addition here from a guitar is we have these wonderful low, long, deep bass strings, which sound great. They're contrabass range. Like think about like a double bass in an orchestra. That's the depth. That's in terms of the pitch level we're talking about here. Although this was used to accompany a lot of opera and chamber music, it also has a beautiful solo repertoire. I think Jerry has some nice images to show us if you want to pop those up on the screen quick. Some other gorgeous paintings of theorbos. So they really were that big, and and they are just these sort of beautiful things with this fantastic sound. Theorbos were one of the first types of lutes that were single strung as opposed to double strung. Now I believe we have a facsimile of a prelude. Actually, we have to see this image. Yeah, I love that one. That gives you a sense of the size of the theorbo. That's not an exaggeration. That's really how big they were. My theorbo, for reference, is sort of a medium-sized theorbo. That would be on the bigger end of the theorbo list. So we have a facsimile. I want to play you some French music for the theorbo so you can hear what it sounds like. This is a prelude. We should have some music. There it is. This is a prelude, as it says, by Monsieur Devisay. Robert Devisay is the composer, and we have that tablature system again. And this is really beautiful. I mean, it looks like, when I first saw this, I thought it was like hieroglyphics, you know. Again, they're just coordinates where to put your fingers. I'll demonstrate a bit so you can hear what the instrument sounds like. So we can hear with this one, we have more volume. I don't know if that's coming across in the microphone, but this is sort of a canon of an instrument in comparison to the first instrument we heard, the lute. When I play in an opera, this sound can really overpower. You can hear that above the whole group. And even today, if you go to the opera and you hear a performance of Handel, you might have harpsichords and theorbos in the orchestra pit, and you might hear that low, deep sound, and that's the theorbo. And it's the length. That's the whole reason it's long. It's the length of the string and the tension of the string combined that allows for that level of punch, which is such a great sound. But as you heard in this prelude, while it can, if you want it to be, if you want it to be big and powerful, you can, but at the same time, if you want it to be sweet, it can have that sweet, soft, plucky quality of the lute, whereas it also has that great bass range of maybe a bowed bass instrument. So we have gotten to where I had intended to get all the way from the oud to the lute, the Baroque guitar, and so basically the flourishing of plucked instruments throughout Europe. There are many more, I assure you, with a lot of fantastic music, but I think that's about all I have on time, right, Jerry?
Well, we have about 9 minutes left. We haven't heard from our audience yet if they have any specific questions for you, but so far it's been just a wonderful experience to hear you play these instruments and share with us this music from centuries ago, which I also very much enjoy the fact that the chaconne that you were playing on the guitar literally sounds like we just turn on the radio and tune into, you know, our top pop chart, and totally. Really, I can imagine you playing one of these chaconne chord progressions, and there's sort of a light drum in the background, and it will just work.
Yeah, it could be a Taylor Swift song, you know. I mean, it doesn't sound old. And that's a 400-year-old, you know, popular strum pattern. I mean, I think it's such an amazing thing. Like, why doesn't everyone know that? That's such a cool fact, you know.
Yeah, and you know that particularly is really fun to recognize, is that we are, you know, we're in the year 2021 and we are doing a lot of new things, we think, but so much of these things that we are still doing, whether that is in music, whether that is in visual arts, so much of the foundation has to come from something that is a lot older, from a much longer tradition, even though we don't recognize that's the case.
Yeah, well, and isn't it cool that also that this wasn't a brand new invention at the time that they were trying to create this brand new thing. They thought they were actually doing something that was inspired by more than 1,000 years ago from their standpoint. And so this was their attempt at recreating their understanding of Greek music. And then there's modern people imitating this, and it's just this long chain, you know, of imitation. But I think it's certainly true that there are still today, as we see with this like chaconne progression, you know, like remnants of this music that haven't gone away. And we have all these popular chord progressions and this like 12 tone system of music where we have 12 notes standard, but this isn't the same, you know, universally. Depending on where you are, our system of like, you know, writing in major and minor, our system of using only 12 notes, these are relative, and it wasn't always the case. It isn't still always the case depending on where you are in the world. So it's just kind of a cool thing to sort of deconstruct what we consider to be the norm of music making. Anyhow, I think that, Yeah, there's something really cool about connecting the dots from the past and old things that sound modern. Speaking of that, there's one other cool thing I want to show you about the Fiorbo. This is just this introduction to show you how sometimes it wasn't always poppy sounding, obviously. This is a pretty cool far out sounding piece from 1604. Check out this chord progression. And it goes places from there, but I mean, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't expect if you said, let me hear a song from 1604, I wouldn't think. Like that sounds like a new idea, you know? And so anyhow, I think that often I'm still blown away by what people did, you know, so long ago in terms of exploration and sounds.
Yeah, so it looks like we have a few questions coming in.
Oh, great.
So
good.
Let's see. How many guitars do you have?
Dangerous question. Well, I can tell you how many I need. Just one more. So I have to tell my wife, I just need one more. So I have a lot. Right now I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8. So 8 types of guitars. And then I have a bunch of other instruments, like Luke instruments. So maybe my plucked collection is something around maybe 12 instruments that I really play. And then I have some that I hang on my wall, ukulele, stuff like that.
Although I suppose that is a common problem for any musicians who play instruments, right? I claim myself to be a vocalist for the most part, and then end up falling very deeply into the world of Renaissance wind instruments. And that particular collection is spawning as well, which is dangerous. Another question, if the sound hole's decoration is not affecting the sound, why does it need to be there?
Well, it obviously it doesn't, because the guitars that we know today don't have, as you can, I don't know if I'm pointing to it correctly. It's so hard. Why is it so difficult?
Almost there.
There we go. I got it. The sound hole of the guitar is open today. It's just an open hole. It's just for air to escape, right? If you had a closed box, well, actually, maybe you start from this point of view. If there was just a string that was taut, you would hear basically click, click, but it's not resonating. So you need a type of box, a wooden chamber, some type of chamber for the sound to echo in, and then it needs to escape. So you need a hole. So that's why it's just simply a sound hole. In this case, it could be anywhere. It could be on the side, it could be on the front. So as long as the sound is escaping, we're good. And because they were super interested in highly ornamenting things, they thought, well, we can't just have a hole. We need to decorate it with a beautiful floral pattern. And this one is called the triple rose. I didn't show you this one yet. I love the detail there. So it's just to be beautiful. And again, as long as the air escapes, it counts as a sound hole.
Do you ever do any Bardcore covers?
Bardcore? I did do one Game of Thrones video. I love that song, "The Rains of Castamere," while the show is still going. I thought it was so beautiful, so I did a Fiorbo version of that one. You can find on YouTube. But I don't do many. No, I tend to really like the actual music from the period, and there's enough people doing the Bardcore thing that I'm kind of letting them go for it. But I totally love the sound.
Yeah, it's a fun meme, if you will, or just sort of new development of music that we can find on the internet web tubes.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, I think we're kind of tricking people into learning that they love the sounds of medieval and Renaissance music, actually. So it's kind of cool.
That's right. Well, we are about out of time here. So Thank you very much, Brandon, for visiting us from Chicago.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and for sharing all the music and the instrument that you have. I'd like to invite you all, those who are tuned in, to stay in touch with us. The UW-Stout Art and Design is on Facebook. We're also on Instagram, so you can check us out there. There are many more guests to come for the speaker series. One fun upside of everything going virtual is that we can bring in a lot more guests, and they can actually be tuning in from anywhere in the world. So I believe we have a wide variety of guests coming in. So stay tuned for upcoming dates. Last but not least, we want to make sure once again to thank the UW-Stout and students specifically for their support for this particular series. So one thing that would really help us to keep this particular series going is if you can, as an audience, fill out a survey and tell us what you think. We will be posting the link to the survey in the announcements. So if you can visit there, that would be fantastic. We would definitely love to hear from you. And with that, once again, thank you, Brandon, and have a good night.
Thank you for watching, everyone. Take care.